Good morning, all. I would like to thank Birzeit University for giving us the chance in this session. And I'm elected I elected as a member in 1979. It was I was preceded by Dr. Sharif Kanane. So, and in all universities, um, there were different. Then they need to do something about the voice. I can't hear. Sorry, but echo and unclear. Today has reminded me. It's really bad. It's really bad, the voice. And then the focus was and then he hit it's not clear. It goes without saying that there is a continuous effort to shrink the spaces for those who seek political or societal change in Palestine, and in most cases where the Palestinian Authority sees a threat to its authority or contradicts its policies or interests. This restriction takes various forms, ranging from sending thugs to attack demonstrators or protesters in key locations in Ramallah and other cities in the West Bank, to arresting activists, including political arrests, and changing and tightening the laws that are related to freedom of assembly or laws related to freedom expressing an opinion published and in publications and websites of all kinds, including social media. However, despite this restriction, there are areas that can be used, or more precisely, these areas have to be expanded despite the restriction, albeit under conditions that are not always available, as I will explain later. These spaces have been exploited, sometimes with success and with failure, or with a measure at other times. Examples of such spaces or change, I refer but not limit to the strikes of public school teachers in 1997, 98, in 2000, 2016, 2020, and 2022. I would also like to refer to the protests that accompanied the announcement of a social security law the end of 2018 and beginning of 2019, which prompted the government to withdraw the law. The protests that followed the killing of Nizar Banat and the protests and efforts to change that was undertaken by a number of NGOs to reform specific laws or reform the judicial system as a whole, in which the Bar Association had also participated, and in fact, many other issues that have taken place over the years with mixed results. In this session, I will present four examples that to show the reasons for success or failure and the main elements of weakness, and which in general apply to other cases. I would like to point out at the beginning that the most important thing in such examples is not the presence of or absence of space for social or political action for a change, but rather the reasons for success, even if the presence of this restriction and the reasons for failure that hindered success in the absence of the necessary factors to overcome this restriction. I start with the teacher strikes from 1997 and up to this year that have achieved a number of not few successes, even if not all the demands were met. One of the main reasons for the success of the unified teachers movement is clear. It's the broad base of teachers in public schools in the West Bank. The number exceeds 30,000 teachers. The majority of them have committed to the strike according to the movement's program. Thus, they were able to paralyze the educational process in public schools almost completely, which led to a societal crisis of several dimensions, and which, of course, needs to be resolved. This is a great source of strength that other protest movements lacked, and it was one of the reasons for their failure. However, this is not the only factor in the relative success of the movement. At a degree close to the importance of the numerical factor, another factor was found. It's the replacement of the strike leadership made up of representatives of the Palestinian General Union of Teachers, which is part of the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was a hindering factor and was initially replaced by an officially unrecognized committees that led to the strike and later called the Unified Teachers Movement. In order to understand the issue with a general union of teachers and more generally what is known as the people's organizations affiliated with the PLO, I will briefly address, and because of the importance of this topic, I would call it the danger of transferring the PLO model to the rule of people on their land and the negative consequences of that on Palestinian societal organization and the political system as a whole. As is well known, the PLO did not comprise of factions and parties only, but its structure so to represent the Palestinians as a whole and included labor and student unions, unions of writers, women and teachers, and institutions, research centers, and non-governmental organizations. The requirement of the national action and the diaspora, the pooling of the energies of the Palestinian society justified such a comprehensive and inclusive organization that's headed by the executive committee of the Liberation Organization, which was necessary to preserve the collective identity of Palestinians and preserve the self and defined its identity in the face of approaching exile and the threat of extinction. But the internal contradiction became clear after its transfer to the rule of people on their land and the identification of the PLO with the Palestinian Authority. This contradiction lies in the merging between societal institutions, which became known as civil society organizations, with the Palestinian Authority after its establishment. As there are the institutions of PLO, where the Palestinian Authority became represented because of the lack of separation between the two. No one seemed to realize the danger of transferring this authoritarian model, which is comprehensive, inclusive for the purpose of ruling a people over their land. The Palestinian Authority, therefore, has now a non-governmental and governmental organizations, including the Teachers Union, which is headed by employees in the state of Palestine, since PLO, according to an official website classification, has become affiliated with the state in this case. And indirectly, the government, which is also the operator, has become the representative of workers. Who are the teachers? The employer represents the workers. Conflict of roles and conflict of interests. So, so if in Beirut State University, the administration, so and this is just like happens in basic university. It's clear that there is this problem in the positioning, and this is the right position now for it. So, thank you. Very clear now. Thank you. So the withdrawal of recognition of the General Union of Teachers by teachers and the formation of another leadership was one of the factors of success because they considered that the union represents the government. And this is the reason for the failure of many of the unions that are considered people's unions affiliated with the PLO, which are now the government of the state of Palestine now represents them. This is for this first case. As for the second case, it's related to the Social Security law, where the Palestinian Authority was in the process of enacting it, and which had sparked widespread protests for different reasons. And the authority was forced to withdraw it and to disregard its implementation. I would like to note here that I will make some quick notes without going in details because there is a paper on this topic that will be presented today. It will be presented by Anmar Rafidi. The paper is based, Anmar's paper is based on original and important research as a case study. And the research was prepared for a master's thesis at Oxford University, which it had focused on the organizational aspect accompanying the process, which is extremely important for the success or failure of efforts to change, as these are restrictions on these efforts. I would like to refer here to a paradox that had accompanied the opposition of the implementation of this law. It lied that the employers and workers united in the position against the application of the law. So they've worked together in solidarity and supported each other for the purpose of annulling it. This is despite the fact that a social security system is supposed to be a vital requirement for the purpose of achieving a measure of social justice and in principle in the best interest of workers. Also, it had parties that consider themselves left-wing participated in protesting against the law and that champion social justice and as an essential part of their program. And without that, they're considered as leftists by definition. There is now a new effort to implement the law, perhaps after making some amendments to it, and we will see what the reactions regarding it would be. So this is a success also case. As for the protests that followed, the killing of Nizar Banat, which continued for several weeks and had taken various forms and large parts of the Palestinian public opinion did not meet the basic demand of the protesters, which is to have an independent criminal investigation and punish those responsible for that. However, due to the constant pressure of public opinions for several months, the authority was forced to take what might have been called tactical steps that might raise the great pressure it was facing. The problem for this, for the authority meaning, was that the one who committed the crime was a group affiliated with one of the apparatuses, and this was certainly done on the instructions of the leaders. But I think it's highly unlikely that the instructions given to them, including killing him, and perhaps they were asked to give him a lesson that he will never forget before bringing him to jail. And in evidence that they brought him to the hospital while he was in a coma, or maybe that he was already dead. But due to the constant pressure and protest, the authority had to do something else. The group that had committed the crime was placed in Jericho prison, and then they were released during the Eid, and maybe there were the discussions amongst them. Anyway, after a period of time, the official responsible for the apparatus was appointed as a minister in the government in a gesture towards the public opinion that he was removed from his position, but he was appointed to a higher position. In general, this was a case of failure in meeting justice. The reason for this is that the pressure of the public opinion was not enough, and demonstrations and protests were not massive or a million to shake the government. Also, this was a difficult case for the Palestinian Authority, since the accused is one of the entities we've seen during the Arab uprisings and revolutions that the Arab regimes are forced at times to make a change if they were faced with massive or a million demonstrations, as if it was just a formality without even compromising to the core of the system or a limited amount of reform. But however, another important element is the public pressure, and mass demonstrations are not the only factor that lead to change. There are other factors in most cases. For example, in the case of Tunisia, Ben Ali was dismissed, but this does not enable the army to remain neutral and did not seek to suppress the demonstrators. In Egypt, the army played an active role in eliminating Mubarak as a scapegoat, fearing that the demonstrations would turn into a coup against the regime. And in coordination with the United States, by the way, as Obama had admitted in his memoirs issued 2 years ago. In Algiers, uh, Abdelaziz Bouteflika resigned after 6 weeks of mass demonstrations. In Sudan's case, as in Algiers, the army played a key role in ousting Omar al-Bashir. I now go to the fourth and last example. It's that the efforts of NGOs over the years try to reform specific laws, for example, penalties for what is known as the honor killing, children's rights, anti-corruption, and the like. The results of these endeavors had been very limited for three reasons. The first is that civil organizations in general lack having a broad popular base that can contribute to pressure towards reform by protesting or demonstrating. We have seen the relative effectiveness of this in the Arab uprisings and revolutions. With regards to civil organizations, the current situation is that every organization or looks to at the reform mostly from its perspective or the perspective of its specialized work. This is a big mistake that will keep the situation as it is. And the executive authority may even welcome these scattered specialized efforts, since it can be portrayed as evidence of freedom of criticism and expression and of active reform uh, efforts. As for the second reason, it's that the priority of reform should lie in reforming the judicial system as a whole after its collapse and the dominance of the executive authority over it, and the loss of any possibility of resorting to it to challenge the executive authority. For example, as happened in the cancelling of parliamentary elections without a legal document that gives the authority the authority to do this. Therefore, the first priority should be a concerted effort in a collective effort for every organization, institution, union, or organized body in the society to work in an orderly and programmed manner for the purpose of reforming the judicial system and making it independent of the executive authority. Without this, no reform can take place. As for the third reason, it lies in the weak organizational base of most Palestinian political parties, with the exception of Hamas and Fatah. And I will talk more about this. This aspect weakens the work of civil society organizations. And this would again affect their work, which will be affected in another situation by the program of the parties and will check their compass and their interaction with those programs and with mutual influence, as in the case of other countries. So this is something very important to note, the relation between the two, and same goes for unions. As for Hamas and Fatah, Hamas in the West Bank, it's in a position of self-preservation and self-defense as it's known, and not in a position that enables it to contribute in the reform efforts or to participate in massive public protests. But for Fatah, actually, what's happening is that there is no single Fatah, and it's not clear what is the significance of this name now, despite it's the association of Fatah is with the authority, and the distinction that made between Fatah, the authority, and Fatah, that's not the authority. So, and I say, despite the meetings held by President Abu Mazen with Fatah from time to time, well, in practice means that the Central Committee of the of Fatah and others that are not in the Central Committee, but they are accounted on it. Or the practical reality is that these that were now mentioned are members of another party that is actually called the ruling party. This is because those who attended the meeting of the National Council in the 2018 or had witnessed the formation of it on TV would have seen the formation of another party, which is actually the ruling party now, meaning that the one who has the power to provide benefits despite the limitations and who supports it, and it is as a continued existence. This party is called, has a name. It's the party of authority, and it consists of a wide spectrum that includes members of the Central Committee and others who consider themselves as Fatah, and businessmen and women, former members of the Legislative Council, members of a number of PLO parties as it is now, and court intellectuals and professionals of different professions, and so on. So this is the uh, power, the party of power. However, the main question regarding Fatah, who will take over the name of the movement in the future? I mean, after the current stage, the stage of Abu Mazen and the phase of the generation that had a militant past, or those who are leaning on this past, as is clearly shown in the media line of Palestine TV and radio, uh, for example. Sometimes if you note that it's a trend that from 40 years or more and about on the radio TV. So these all it's as if we're back to Lebanon in the armed struggle. So this is what I mean, that they're leaning on it. There's a continuous effort to regain the past for just to refer to the future, to the present. But I think this has its own effect. Now, not much. We're now at the beginning of this phase. We're now at the beginning of this transitional phase. It's because that those who will make it to the phase from this generation will not have this past that is which was ended after leaving Lebanon in 1982. We're now at the beginning of this stage, and the expanding the spaces of struggle will take a field character at the beginning due to the injustice of the occupation and the continued theft of land and the increasing and uncontrolled violence of the settlers on the ground. So we see in the case of Al-Aqsa martyrs in Jenin and Nablus, and this is a struggle over who is Fatah now. So this is a struggle over who is Fatah now. And politically, there I was on the field. Politically, as in the case of the reform movement started by Nasser al-Qudwa, regardless of how we consider it, he said it was a criticism to the authority as it is now, and he was looking for something different, and that's why he was excluded. I expect that the phenomenon of Fatah expatriates, I mean, any expatriates from Fatah, and by the way, they're actually very large in numbers. It will be the incubator for Fatah that will be a new Fatah after this stage, or renewed. Although the struggle over the expansion of protest spaces will continue in the future, but achieving results in the struggle depends to a large extent on the mechanisms used and the aspects to be reformed. In conclusion, expanding spaces for political and societal action for change requires the presence of strong parties in the sense that it has a relatively broad mass base recruited for specific purposes that aid to or lead to a change. In addition, the necessary organizational structure for the success of change efforts and to combat the shrinking of these spaces requires other organized and effective frameworks, especially unions of all kinds, not only trade unions, labor unions, all kinds, and others of all professions, and those that are independent of the Palestinian Authority as they are now. I mean, after this authority had become, that is, after the PLO had become one of the circles of the Palestinian state that is not actually, did not actually exist, that was mobilized to serve the existing regime.